My hay baler was sinking, and I do mean sinking, not stuck, not muddy, not maybe I can pull it out later. I mean half submerged in brown water like some rusting shipwreck in the middle of a field that had been bone dry the night before. I stood there with coffee still warm in my hand, boots sliding into the mud, staring at $9,000 worth of equipment leaning sideways, while the smell of wet clay, diesel, and rotting grass came up out of the ground like the land itself was trying to tell me something. 2 acres of my grandfather's farm had turned into a pond overnight, and I already knew exactly who to thank. My name's Everett, and out on the rural edge of central Virginia, what a man owns can tell you more about his life than his handshake ever will. I've got 43 acres my grandfather bought back in 1961 with cash and a handshake back when a man's word still counted for something. My father ran cattle here. I run hay lease pasture to a neighbor with horses, keep a kitchen garden big enough to feed half a church picnic. The land rolls easy in the front, then slopes off toward a natural drainage swale in the back. Nothing dramatic, just one of those old quiet pieces of geography that's been doing its job longer than most county officials have been alive. About a quarter-mile south of me sits Ashford Crossing, one of those neat little subdivisions carved out of farmland by people who think vinyl fencing looks rustic. 214 homes matching lawns, 1 clubhouse, 1 retention pond, and 1 HOA with enough petty energy to power a small city. I wasn't in their neighborhood, didn't belong to their association, didn't owe them a dime or a second of my attention. But over the years, I watched them fine. A retired teacher over a wind chime threaten a veteran because his trash can sat out 2 hours too long, and force a young couple to repaint shutters because the board decided the color leaned more burgundy than colonial red. That was their world-tiny authority dressed up like public service. And running that little kingdom was Margot Whitfield. Mid-50s silver bob, pearl earrings, white Lexus SUV, the kind of woman who could say community benefit with a straight face while quietly making your life harder behind the scenes. She'd wormed her way into every small pocket of county influence that rewards persistence more than wisdom. Planning subcommittee neighborhood watch, zoning board friendships, garden parties with the right people. You know the type. Not powerful in any grand sense, just powerful enough in a small place to start believing the rules were hers to bend. The trouble started when Ashford Crossing's drainage system began failing, which frankly was not a surprise. It had been built cheap. Hard rain came lower, streets flooded ankle-deep, homeowners complained. And suddenly Margot needed a solution that wouldn't cost the HOA reserve fund, wouldn't force a lawsuit against the long-gone developer, and wouldn't embarrass her in front of the county. What she needed apparently was my field. I got the first letter by certified mail, HOA, letterhead, polished language, soft tone, hard intention. It said, Ashford Crossing intended to seek a stormwater easement in the interest of regional drainage management, and they wanted to redirect part of their runoff through the southern edge of my property. They used the word cooperative 4 times. They never once used the word compensation. I read it at my kitchen table with burnt coffee in the pot and bacon grease still cooling on the stove, and I made the mistake a whole lot of decent people make. I assumed that if I answered reasonably, reason would meet me halfway. I wrote back, polite, factual, neighborly. I explained my drainage swale was already near capacity in heavy rain, that additional engineered outflow could saturate the lower field-damaged soil and wreck agricultural use. I even offered to discuss alternatives, including a shared cost fix to their retention pond. 3 weeks passed, no reply. Then a county code officer named Dexter showed up with a pending variance notice. Margot's HOA had already filed. According to the application, notice had been provided to the property owner, meaning me. 1 letter, 1 ignored response, and now I was expected to walk into a hearing and pretend this had all been fair. I showed up anyway. Clean shirt type statement, field photos, drainage sketch. Everything I thought a reasonable man would need if facts still mattered in a room with fluorescent lights and burnt coffee. Margot showed up with a spiral-bound engineering report from some firm out of Richmond, and 6 residents positioned behind her like a little applause section. I asked for a 60-day continuance so I could get an independent hydrology review. She stood up and spoke for 11 minutes about community needs, shared responsibility, and regional resilience, which is politician language for "we'd like your land and we don't intend to pay for it." The board voted 4-1 in her favor. Only 1 man dissented. On the way out to the parking lot, he leaned close and told me quietly, "Get yourself a water rights attorney. Fast." That's how Cornelia Voss entered the story. Cornelia was 38, sharp as broken glass, and practiced property law out of Charlottesville. She listened to the whole mess without interrupting, then said the thing I didn't want to hear. Let them finish. Let the rain tell the story. I hated that advice. Felt like watching someone lay kindling around your barn and being told to hold still until they struck the match. But she was right. In court, threatened damage is an argument. Actual damage is evidence. So I documented everything. When the contractor came out with a mini excavator and cut a new drainage channel along my south line, I photographed every inch of it. Wide shots, close-ups, GPS, tagged images, soil disturbance, grading angle, everything. Diesel in the air, fresh-cut earth piled along the fence. Men just doing their jobs with valid permits in their pockets. I didn't say a word to them. By then I was done arguing with tools. I was interested in records. August stayed dry, which was almost insulting. The new channel trickled water into my swale, not enough to prove disaster, just enough to make me wonder whether I'd misjudged it. Margot even sent me a second letter warmer, now smiling through the words, saying she hoped we could move past our earlier misunderstanding and that I'd be welcome at the fall community cookout as her personal guest. I showed it to Cornelia. She looked at it once and said, "She's building a paper trail of goodwill. Do not answer." So while she played hostess on paper, I went digging in the county records. That's where the first real twist surfaced. The original subdivision approval from 2017 said all Ashford Crossing drainage had to be contained within its own engineered retention system. No discharge onto neighboring agricultural land. None. That wasn't a suggestion, it was a condition of approval. Then I hired an independent hydrologist, Gareth Finch, an older semi-retired watershed man who walked my field in rubber boots, took soil samples, measured the channel, and ended up finding something even better than bad hydrology. 16 inches of that drainage cut crossed over my property line in one section. Not on the easement corridor. My land. Trespass. Then September rolled in with the remnants of a Gulf storm and dumped 9 inches of rain across central Virginia. I drove home through sheets of water headlights smeared by rain tires, hissing over roads that looked half creek, half asphalt. When I crested the rise above my south field, I didn't see land anymore. I saw a lake. Wind-rippled copper-brown swallowing fence posts to the midpoint, drowning my lower field, feeding straight from that shiny new drainage channel like a fire hose pointed at my grandfather's memory. My baler sat hub-deep and leaning. I stood in the rain and took 47 photos and 6 straight minutes of video before calling Cornelia. "How bad?" she asked. "My field smells like wet clay and something dead," I said, "and now the something dead might be my equipment." There was a little pause, and then I heard it in her voice. Not joy exactly, but the satisfaction of a professional watching facts arrive right on time. "Good," she said. "We file Monday." By the end of that week, Ashford Crossing and Margot Whitfield personally were staring at a civil suit for drainage, tort, nuisance, trespass, property damage, and violation of the original subdivision stormwater covenant. Their insurance lawyer called quick, smooth, and quiet, trying to make it disappear for 14 grand. Cornelia answered with a number over 10 times that, broken down to the penny: equipment loss, crop loss, soil remediation, survey costs, expert fees, long-term productivity damage. That got his attention. And then Margot made the mistake that really started killing her. She mailed a letter to my neighbors calling me difficult, claiming my flooding was pre-existing, painting the lawsuit as some frivolous tantrum from a man who didn't understand modern development. She signed it as HOA president. HOA letterhead official title, false factual claims, third-party recipients. Cornelia laughed when she saw it, that she said tapping the page is defamation in writing. On official stationery, she just gifted us another claim. Only the letter didn't land the way Margot thought it would. My neighbor Dale looked at his copy and said, "She thinks I don't know you." The Okonkwo's, who ran a small organic operation nearby, called and told me they'd had their own run-ins with Ashford Crossing. Earl Pruitt, the same veteran they'd harassed over a trash can, showed up at my driveway, shook my hand and asked one question: "What do you need?" "What do you—" That's when the fight changed. Up to that point, it was my field against her HOA. After that, it became a coalition. Renata Okonkwo had files, zoning interference permit issues, petty complaints. Earl knew a county supervisor. Gareth kept digging into the hydrology. Cornelia kept pulling records. And then the second bigger twist came loose like rotten wood under a boot heel. Ashford Crossing's retention pond had never been built to the original approved capacity. It was supposed to handle a 25-year storm event. What they actually had was closer to a 10-year design, about 30% undersized from the original approval, which meant Margot's whole good faith engineering solution was built on a system that had been out of compliance for years. And then Gareth found something almost poetic. By forcing excess runoff into my field, they hadn't solved their drainage problem. They'd changed the groundwater behavior under the southern edge of their own subdivision. Water was saturating clay-heavy ground and pushing laterally toward the lowest homes on Willowmere Court. In plain English, Margot had redirected the water onto my land, and physics was getting ready to send the consequences right back home. Cornelia warned their attorney in writing. They ignored it. December brought a long, cold rain, the kind that doesn't shout, just settles in and keeps falling until the earth gives up. My field flooded again. My soil sensors logged everything, and 3 basements on Willowmere Court took on water. Wet carpet damaged drywall, ruined water heater, panicked homeowners standing in socks on concrete floors, wondering how this had happened. One of those homeowners, a quiet man named Fitzgerald, knocked on my door a day later. I sat him at my kitchen table and showed him the documents, the warning letter, the reports, the maps, the whole stack. He read in silence for nearly an hour, then looked up at me and said, "I think I need my own lawyer." He did, and he wasn't the only one. Now, it wasn't just me suing. Now homeowners inside Ashford Crossing were coming after their own HOA. Margot cornered and rattled, did what people like that always do when the walls start closing in. She escalated. Tried to weaponize county code against my hay operation. That died fast under Virginia's right to farm protections. Tried whispering to the local paper. Tried hiring more lawyers. Then, in one final act of arrogance, she called Gareth directly and threatened his professional standing over his report. He recorded the call. That recording hit Cornelia's desk like a hammer. By January, the county had done its own administrative review. The board meeting was packed. Homeowners, neighbors, Gareth, Cornelia, Margot in the third row, looking polished and untouchable. Then the county read the findings into the record. Ashford Crossing's pond had been built at roughly 70% of permitted capacity. The drainage variance that sent water onto my land had been granted based on a non-compliant system. The variance was rescinded. The HOA was ordered to bring the pond into compliance at its own expense. The room went dead quiet. Then Fitzgerald stood up and read what happened on Willowmere Court, and for the first time, Margot looked like somebody had pulled the floor out from under her. Not dramatic, not movie style, just that slow public unraveling that happens when the paperwork finally gets louder than the personality. She resigned from the county planning subcommittee 11 days later. She resigned as HOA president the month after that. 3 weeks later, the civil case settled. I got $212,000 full soil remediation, agricultural recovery, funding removal of the drainage channel, restoration of my property, and written retractions sent to every person who got her little smear letter. The Willowmere Court homeowners got their settlements too. The new HOA board had to retrofit the pond anyway, which cost them another small fortune. By spring, crews were out on my land with aerators, regrading equipment, compost amendments. All the slow, unglamorous work it takes to heal saturated clay. And standing out there one morning, boots in the same soil she'd tried to use as her dumping ground, I had one of those realizations that comes a little late and sticks with you longer than you want. The lesson wasn't that the law always works. It doesn't. It wasn't that good people always win. They don't. It was simpler, meaner, and truer than that small power gets dangerous when nobody challenges it, and a whole lot of damage in this world gets done by people who mistake access for wisdom and paperwork for righteousness. Margot didn't lose because karma floated down from heaven on a rain cloud. She lost because records mattered, witnesses mattered, patience mattered, and water honest, stubborn, unbribable water kept telling the truth. This year the hay came in clean. The field isn't perfect yet, but it's alive again. The sensors are still logging. The property line is still where it always was. Ashford Crossing finally had to fix the thing they should have fixed in the first place. And every time I pass that lower field, I remember the smell of wet clay, the sound of rain filling a man-made ditch, and the look on Margot's face when the county read her own decisions back to her in public. That right there was the satisfying part. Not the money, though I won't pretend that didn't help. Not even the settlement letter. It was watching someone who'd spent years pushing people around discover in one very quiet room that the rules were still real, and this time they were coming for her. So here's my question for you. When somebody with a title, a board seat, or a little local influence starts acting like that makes them right, how far should people be allowed to push back before it gets called revenge instead of justice? And honestly, I want to hear your take. Have you ever dealt with an HOA, a zoning board, a neighbor, or some petty little gatekeeper who thought they could get away with anything because nobody ever challenged them? Tell me where you think the line is between standing up for yourself and making them pay for what they did. And if you've lived through something like this, share your story too.
Cảm ơn các bạn đã xem video. Cảm ơn các bạn đã xem video.